Hi everyone, this is Haley and Ryan from Vapor Honing Technologies, and today we're going to talk about the lifespan of consumable parts while using those in wet and dry blasting cabinets. Alright, so first off we need to define what a consumable part is. These are parts that you're going to be using every day, and they may suffer from some wear and tear. Consumable parts include gloves, windows, blasting gun tips, and hoses.
Consumables are really just things that you would expect to see some wear and tear on. So again, like things like gloves, you're going to be blasting, they're going to be getting hit, and they are going to start to wear after you've used the machine quite a bit. But today, again, we're just going to compare a little bit between a wet blasting cabinet and a sandblasting cabinet. Now, speaking of these two machines, they are two very similar systems, but they're also quite different. And as you guys can probably deduce by the name, with a wet blasting cabinet, you are adding water. And what this actually does is it lessens the impact force of the abrasive when it's slamming into your parts, and also when it's interacting with your consumables. So for instance, when you guys are blasting, let's say you're blasting a part that has a concave section and it's actually coming back towards the window, that water is not going to damage that window anywhere near as much as it would if it was a sandblast cabinet, because that sandblasting, that media would actually be interacting directly with that window. Whereas with a wet blast cabinet, there is that water in there to kind of cushion it. To even get more specific with the blasting gun tips, with wet blasting we use boron carbide tips versus sandblasting, it's typically a ceramic. So our boron carbide tips are actually much harder and they last much longer. So unless you guys are using a very aggressive media like silicon carbide, you really shouldn't expect to replace the blasting gun tip often at all. We actually hardly ever ship any out just because they do last so long, because the water does such a good job of cushioning the abrasive as it comes through the blasting gun tip, and it always delivers that perfect finish.
So with a wet blasting cabinet, you can expect your windows to last about a year, and this is because of the less aggressive nature of wet blasting.
Now, I know if you guys are familiar with sandblasting, you're expecting to have tear-offs, but that doesn't really exist with wet blasting, again, because these windows already last so long that it's not really necessary. That's just more of a pain to deal with, especially with the water. But you can't expect these windows to last longer than a typical sandblasting window would. Now, something you guys can do to actually make certain that your window lasts longer is make certain that your window rinse is functioning as it should. Now, all of our machines from, I think it's the Weekend Warrior Bare Essentials and up, include a window rinse, and that's kind of just the piece that sits above the window and applies a little bit of water to it as you're blasting. It's intermittently. This is going to keep the abrasive off of the window and also allow you guys to get a good visual of your part while you're blasting. You just want to make sure that it's not getting clogged and that it's functioning as it should throughout the lifespan of the cabinet. Now, your window rinse is actually more important if your machine has a window wiper. So if you have something like a VH800FL that does include the window wiper, making certain that there's a clean source of water being applied to that window while you're blasting is going to help your window and your wiper blade last longer. Now, the wiper blade on our cabinets typically lasts about a year, and that's with everyday use. So the window and the wiper blade are the same as far as the consumable nature of them goes.
So out of all of the consumable parts of a cabinet, the gloves are probably one of the most important as well as the most abused.
With the vapor honing unit, you guys can expect your gloves to last about a year. That's with everyday use. So this is actually better than your typical sandblasting cabinet, again, and it's just because of the lessened effect of the abrasive when it hits the actual glove. There are a few things you can do to help your gloves last a little bit longer. And first, you want to pull those gloves out of the machine when you finish blasting. This just, again, it just helps them last a little bit longer because they're not sitting in the moisture of the cabinet. You're actually pulling them out. And additionally, one of the main things you guys can do, and this is kind of intuitive, is when you're blasting, try not to blast directly on the glove. There are some things that we use to help prevent this, especially if you guys are blasting small parts, because I know it's difficult to hold them. We use things like cricket baskets to actually blast those small parts. That way you're not having to hold them. But when you're blasting a part, again, just don't blast directly on it, and it's going to make them last even longer.
So now that we've talked about the consumables that suffer the greatest amount of wear and tear, we're now going to talk about abrasives.
With the abrasives, as we've kind of explained, there is going to be less impact force when you're using a vapor honing cabinet. And again, that's just because of the slurry that's used rather than just the abrasive. So if you kind of think about it in terms of dropping a glass cup, And I'm glad I'm using this example because 2A actually made an excellent video on this. But if you take a glass cup and drop it onto a table, it's probably going to break the first time. But if you add a thin layer of water when you drop it, it actually will not break. And that's what 2A's video proved. We'll link to it here and it'll probably be in the description. But that's a good example of how the abrasive is characterized when it's used in a vapor honing cabinet. So with a sandblasting cabinet, if you are using something like glass bead, it's gonna break down really fast. And it's also gonna leave kind of poor results on the part because it is just slamming into it. So when you guys are blasting with aluminum, it's opening those pores up. It looks poor when it's finished. But with a vapor honing cabinet, that water is gonna provide that cushioning effect, and it's gonna cause that media to last 3 to 4 times longer. Now, with everyday use with medias like glass bead, we typically see about a month of use, and with different abrasives, it can last longer because glass bead is one of our abrasives that breaks down the fastest. I know that aluminum oxide can last a little bit longer, but we, again, typically recommend replacing your abrasive every month.
So it's safe to assume that the less aggressive nature of wet blasting would also apply to blasting parts.
Yeah, and that's 100% true because with wet blasting, again, that water that's being added in is lowering the impact force of that abrasive when it hits your part. So you're not gonna have to worry about removing surface material off of them or pitting metal parts. And if you're blasting parts that are made of plastic or rubber, you don't have to worry about removing or damaging that material because, again, wet blasting is safe on those components. And lastly, if you're blasting thin parts, you don't have to worry about warping those parts due to the friction of the actual sandblasting process, heating it up and warping them, because the water in a vapor honing unit will keep that friction down and also keep that heat down. So wet blasting is much safer on your consumables, your abrasives, and your actual part that you're blasting inside of your machine.
All right, thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe and follow all of our social media.
If you guys are actually ready to get the best surface finishing equipment on the market today, put it in your home, shop, wherever you guys want to utilize it, especially for businesses. We offer a lot of great machines for businesses. Make sure you guys call us at 828-202-5563. We'll help you figure out which machine, which abrasives, what pressures you guys need to be using to get amazing results today. Again, that number is 828-202-5563. Thank you all for watching and have a great day. Peace.